Most games get patch notes, whereas Deadlock gets patch novels. But hey, I'm not complaining, as we've received another gigantic hotfix for Deadlock, featuring of course some gameplay updates that slightly tweak the flow of the game, alongside a large list of item changes, of course off the back of that major item rework we got a couple weeks ago now, as they're trying to iron out any teething issues with the new itemization. On top of that, a large list of heroes were also given some revisions and balance changes. Oh boy, another big patch. Let's get into it. You're watching Patch Notice here on Dead Air. And as always, I'm your host, Jacky, back from Finland and excited to dive straight back into the cursed apple, which of course has had quite a few changes, namely some of them being to the map itself, which if you've been keeping up with the recent balance and hotfixes that have been being shipped by Valve, you'll realise that there's clearly a lot of focus right now on rebalancing both the defensive and offensive gameplay around the base. That trend will continue here, as Valve have sprinkled in a couple of changes that might spice up the gameplay somewhat. You can see on screen that the outer lanes of both bases have been given some new walls, brand new models as well that actually look pretty cool. Both of them have got different theming, with of course that upper class sort of more polished marble being over on the left hand side with the green lanes, and York lanes having a more industrial feel to them. Now in terms of the gameplay elements that this could bring to the table, we're just generally getting more cover. Defending the base or attacking the base, vice versa, it's a bit awkward. Over the course of time, you'll notice that you take a lot of damage with clear lines of sight and no way to break it. In the most recent hotfix, of course, Valve removed that tree from Blue Lane and replaced it with more cover. They've done the same sort of thing here, giving you options to bob and weave to be able to take fights from outside of these walls and tuck back in, which in turn should provide more gameplay options when it comes to aggressing or defending these outer lanes. Of course, this should make it far easier then when you're actually being put in a position where you're going to have your base guardians being smashed to bits by a mob of angry deadlockers. Now, this way it will at least give you a little bit more cover. As you can see with the top-down perspective here, you've got a fair amount to play with. But on the other hand of things, when aggressing on these lanes, you now have a way to break line of sight, which could be pretty useful, giving you some newer escape routes to break cover, take a left-hand turn, and dip out of the base. So when retreating, say a Wraith card is following you, tracking you down, you have a few more options now to actually bob and weave and make it a bit harder for that Wraith to confirm the kill. You can see with the gameplay here that you've got some elements for right-hand peaks as well that should allow you to kind of head glitch it in a way with how Deadlock works with the leans, so that you can take peeks from the right-hand side, deal some damage, and dip back into cover. Now, talking of cover, Valve have continued this trend over on Broadway. You can see with this top down that we've got a new green square. Of course, this is a new stand that's been added inside of this update. This new stand in general does have some oddities to it and a few bizarre quirks. With the zipline being right above the top, you can accidentally get stuck inside of the new stand when attempting to zip. But I imagine Valve will have this fixed relatively soon, as we used to have some bugs like this back with the old base design where you could get caught on the map geo. I don't imagine this will be around for too long, so I disregard it for now. In terms of the bigger implications of what this means though, as I said previously, when we had those early mid-fights with the newer free-lane version of Deadlock, there wasn't much cover. You can see here, backpedaling from your Broadway walker is relatively awkward, with no way to break line of sight, leaving you completely exposed in these awkward elongated fights that do tend to occur in this area. This will at least give you some options. Now, it's mountable as well, of course, with you being able to play on top of it, behind it, round the corner of it, or below it. So there is a few different ways that you can use this newsstand to your advantage. I do think it's a really positive change and a good step in the right direction, breaking up some of those open, expansive lines of sight with some new map geo that will give give you a few more areas to tuck into. Of course, removing that tree was one step, and adding some extra cover was a good addition. This is just a further advancement of that change. Switching over though down to the mid-boss arena, Valve say that they've improved the lighting inside of this area. At first glance, you might be thinking nothing's changed, but you can see here with this before and after when looking at the left and right hand side cubbies that in reality they've just brightened up these darker areas underneath the stairs. These were actually really useful with how dark they were, as you could juke players out and tuck in if you went the whole way round, bypassing the zip and dropping back in. But with the addition of these new candles, there'll be some illumination that should make it harder for players to miss you when juking them out in these areas. We can move on from that though and forget about the map changes, as there is a vast list of hero changes to sink our proverbial teeth into. Let's start off of course with one of the faces of Deadlock himself, the detective, Abrams. Now, for Abrams, it's Infernal Resilience that has had a couple of changes to it. Damage regeneration has been increased from 10% to 12%, so a bit of a buff there for the Infernal Resilience passive that Abrams has, with its tier 3 even going up by an additional percentage from 5 to 6. Overall, damage mitigation and regeneration here should be even better for the big blue man. Health growth per boon though has been slightly reduced to compensate, going down from 81 to 78 per boon level up. Over the duration of a game of Deadlock, of course, this compounds a lot, so it's a pretty big change for what it is. The next one is related to shoulder charge, with various network-related issues being fixed. Love the sound of that. Anytime we get any of these minor adjustments that are network-related, the game does tend to feel a lot better. But it's not just placebo or potential tweaks, it's also raw stat changes, with shoulder charge's wall stun also being toyed with here. Hell, even the tier 2 has been basically completely reworked, with a 12-second cooldown being removed and an increase on the stun being brought in, and the tier 3 instead being what gives you that cooldown reduction. They've gone on further to also tweak Seismic Impact's cooldown, adding an additional 10 seconds on Abrams' ultimate. Now, Seismic Impact did feel like it was off cooldown pretty regularly, and of course, as much as this is only 10 seconds, you then have to factor in how this will affect cooldown reduction items as well, with its increased base value. Should make a bit of a difference. Leaping up into the sky though, let's switch on over to everyone's favourite Scrap Golem and see what Valve have done here, as there's been a couple of tweaks to Bebop. Normally, whenever Bebop appears in the patch notes, we're just expecting to see him get quicker and quicker and quicker. But that's enough of that. They've moved away from the days of buffing this man's speed and instead are focusing on his cooldowns. This time around, it's actually a reduction for Hyper Beam's cooldown, going down by a substantial 20 seconds. So of course, the opposite of what I've just said there with that Abrams ultimate in terms of the CD reduction compounding when you think about itemization for Bebop. There could be a lot of Gyarados level plays coming out from the Scrap Golem in your city now. Moving on, they've also again tried to improve some issues with lag compensation regarding the hook. That's a great change. Especially in the more recent weeks with some of the builds of Deadlock, I've noticed that the hook had been a bit egregious, feeling like it's dragging you back even if it didn't connect. Hopefully this is targeted and fixed that. But let's move on to the cat lover's favourite hero, because of course we've got to talk about Calico. Similarly to Bebop, whenever you see Calico's name in the patch notes, you always expect gargantuan nerfs, but in reality it's more focusing on Ava the cat. Self-slow on damage duration has been increased from 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds, with the self-slow on damage increase going up from -50% to -60%. A lot of minor tweaks to Ava inside of this patch, with even the tier 1 duration going down by 6 seconds, previously being +20, now only being +14. Of course, the rise of box maxing and passively how Ava works, it just goes hand in hand. So Valve seems to be focusing a lot here on reducing the overall egregiousness of how many builds you can get away with when running some really competitive Ava setups, trying to mitigate her being the main focus of Calico builds and bringing back some focus potentially on the gun itself, because Valve have actually buffed Calico's ammo count here, going up by 1 round from 9 to 10 bullets inside of the magazine. Curious to see how this will change things, if it really feels better overall. Of course, it's one bullet, but it could still make the difference in confirming a kill. Let's have a look then at the top dog when it comes to hunting. The legend himself, Great Alan. For GT, it's a lot of changes to do with his guided owl, with even the duration going up by an additional 2 seconds here, from 14 to 16. Again, 2 seconds might not feel like much of a difference, but in practice might actually help you out an awful lot, giving you additional time to secure those kills. Hell, with even the cooldown reduction going down slightly from 127 to 125, shaving off 2 seconds there before you can get your next owl out. And of course, they've even buffed that tier 2 cooldown reduction by an additional few seconds as well. On top of that, this is quite a big one for me. Spirit Snare's radius has gone up from 6.2 to 6.5, a minor increase, but in practice a far larger radius to play with, and this thing feels huge now. Previously it felt like it was relatively avoidable, whereas in this build of Deadlock you can see the gargantuan side of it. Great Alan has clearly got better at weaving these traps, as that rope is looking huge. We can move on though to the cowgirl herself, Holiday. Now, Holiday, as of late, has basically just been getting a lot of minor tweaks where it comes to kind of fixing gameplay or lag compensation. Similarly, we've got one of those slipped in here. A lot of these inside of this patch, which bodes well. Valve working on kind of fixing the nitty-gritty of lag compensation and the consistency of the game is really good in my mind, so love to see that. Spirit Lasso's cooldown, however, has gone up slightly, from 100 seconds to 105, and to compensate for that as well, its tier 3 has even been slightly tweaked, with Spirit Lasso going up from a minus 30 second cooldown to minus 35 seconds to compensate for the changes. Now let's have a look at Infernus. I was kind of expecting Infernus nerfs, as it feels like they do pop up from time to time, but this one is actually a buff. Afterburn headshot build-up rate has been improved by 10%, so you're more rewarded for going for headshots when trying to apply your dots, which is good. It will encourage better aiming, more proficiency when it comes to hitting headshots, and overall feels like you should be given more damage build-up if you're maximizing those damage outputs with headshots. Love that change. That's a fun one. This one is actually really a fun one. Let's have a look at the McGuinness edition inside of this patch. Listed in the notes as fixed turret bugs when thrown at the throne room, this is what was happening. Previously, when you would launch out your turrets, they would kind of just bounce, clip into the walls, and they weren't really sure where to go. You can see they wouldn't even fully deploy and turn into the larger model size upon successful deployment of the turrets. They would just sort of get stuck inside the throne and not know what they're doing. But that's been fixed now. Moving on from that, Mo and Krill is focused on as well, with quite a few changes actually. Base gun damage has gone up by 0.1 for the Yellow Canary, so your damage output will be slightly better when blowing away with this bad boy in lane. They've even tweaked Scorn as well, with its spirit scaling going up from 0.39 to 0.42. Scorn, of course, can be a very powerful ability if used in the right manner, so I do like the fact you're being rewarded with additional spirit scaling, especially as Mo and Krill has felt a little bit weak as of late with some of the more, I'd say, on the nose nerfs that have been thrown in. Combo's cooldown has also been increased by an additional 5 seconds. This one I feel like is a fair enough nerf, with Combo again feeling like it's an ultimate that is always off CD. Let's jump over though into Pocket and see what they're all about, as we've got a couple of changes to Pocket inside of this patch. Flying Cloak spirit damage scaling has been increased. That's another one that's going up fairly largely as well, from that 1.04 to 1.3. This could make the world a difference, especially on spirit builds for Pockets if you're looking to get that burst damage output or just to try and clear waves with the coat. 7. Up in the sky, the Electric Man himself has really been hit with some interesting changes inside of this patch. A lot of tweaks to do with Storm Cloud. You can see there was a lot of focus inside of this one with Valve coming in, tweaking the DPS by reducing it by 5, but then going in to try and tweak, of course, that tier 3 as well. That's gone down by 5 also, so it starts to compound here. Minor tweak in terms of the spirit scaling being increased to try and cancel things out a little bit and make it more fair with spirit scaling rather than raw DPS output off the back of Storm Cloud. And then even the cooldown going up from 148 to 155. But this next change might have more impact than at first seems. You can see the Valve say that they fixed health regen being at 3 rather than 1.5. That's double the health regeneration at base for 7, which of course adds to that progressive power that he has in terms of being a hyper carry when he really can just consistently get back into fights with such quick base HP regeneration. This change should have some knock-on effects. Those power surgers out there will be pleased to know that you're going to be rewarded with increased spirit scaling inside of the latest build of Deadlock as well. I've always been a big fan of power surge and feel like builds that focus around it are pretty rewarding on 7, so that's a good change with spirit scaling there, adding to your damage output as a power surger. Let's have a look at some magic tricks though and see what Valve have done to make Sinclair potentially reappear. Because of course, if you remember back when he graduated from Hero Labs, he was quite the lane bully, with Vexing Bolt being unbelievably strong, but on top of that, it was his assistant that was just outputting so much damage, and it really felt like he would ruin you in the early game and then massively fall off. Clearly, Valve have gone in here and attempted to try and give him a little bit of a buff in a manner that isn't too overpowered. I do fear, though, it could really have some knock-on effects with potentially some of the tweaks to the Spectral Assistant, including that increased duration that she now has. On top of that, we've also had Rabbit Hex's cooldown going down by 5 seconds. So for the naysayers that haven't been enjoying Sinclair's kit as of late, I'm curious to see if this will win people back over. We'll see, won't we? Moving on then, let's have a card trick and appear somewhere else, as Wraith is back in the building with some changes. And this one is going to be a nerf, but not in the way you might think. Of course, gun builds go absolutely loco with Wraith right now, but it's actually telekinesis that's had a reduction to its duration, going down from 3 seconds to 2.75. Side-by-side comparison here, so you can get a grasp of just how that feels with that minor reduction. It will make a bit of a difference, making it feel a little bit snappier to get back in fights after being locked down by her ult. Of course, we can then move on to the rockabilly himself. It's Shiv. Shiv here has actually had his rage generation reduced by 10% per weapon damage output. Quick comparison here as well, so you can get a little bit of a grasp on how this might feel in terms of that reduced rage generation on Shiv. They've then gone ahead and reduced the base damage of the alt fire as well. Of course, that alt fire, very powerful. There is a bit of a drawback, of course, with it knocking you back physically, but it's so useful for mass securing souls with just one simple right click, so the damage reduction will probably be fair enough, as Shiv continues to be a pain in the backside in my games. Warden is next on the docket. Similar sort of flavour here, with bullet damage per boom being reduced from 0.74 to 0.6. Of course, like I said with Wraith, gun builds also go balmy on Warden right now. He's so strong if you build full gun, the right items can make him go loco, so glad to see a bit of a tweak there, of course, over the course of the game. Last Stand has also had a major tweak with its interrupt going up by an additional 10 seconds when you get that CD off the back of an interrupt. Now, this is actually going to make it a little bit fairer potentially, because of course getting that 20-second cooldown off the back of a stun when casting made it feel like you could throw it out without a care in the world. This one might make it a bit more risky. And we get a cameo appearance from Viscous as well, with one simple change. Goo Ball duration reduced by 1 second. Now again, like I've said a couple times inside of tonight's patch notice, 1 second doesn't feel like an awful long time, but it's when you then compound, of course, cooldown reduction items on top of it, or items that extend the length of duration. This will make it so they don't get as long as quick. Gameplay changes are next on the docket, and there's a few interesting ones that have been thrown into the mix in the DNA of Deadlock. Let's start heading towards the base, because of course that base resistance for troopers, that's going to be enemy troopers inside of your base, of course, getting extra resistance. That's actually gone down slightly inside of this patch by 5%, from 40 to 35. It did feel a bit egregious. I'm glad we're scaling that back a bit with Valve finding a more comfortable balance to tweak the base this to try and make games end sooner, but not make troops feel unkillable. Now, box maxers will hate this one. Breakable souls have been rescaled, so it's actually going to be less efficient to box max with, of course, the different values now on screen. So they're not going to increase as quickly as they did previously, with larger soul bounties inside of Fairfax boxes not being as available as easily. This one's a crazy change, by the way. Valve have fixed neutrals near the base, gaining the near base trooper resist, meaning the jungle camps that were close, potentially the one with the tier 2 inside of the nearby warehouse, was actually getting the resistance that the troopers were getting. So it was harder for you to farm the jungle camps unintentionally. Absolutely giga brain fix here. Can't believe someone figured this out, and do wonder how much of a backside problem this has been, with none of us even realizing. Moving on from that then, let's get into the item changes, as there's quite a few, so I'm going to highlight some of the more interesting ones that have been thrown into the mix. And we can start off with a pretty major change for Healing Nova. It's now going to be a higher cost tier 3 item that will grant you +8 to your spirit power. Base heal has also been increased from 260 to 325, and on top of that, it will now scale with boons rather than spirit power. That's going to be 7 HP per boon. Cooldown also being reduced slightly as well, so quite a few major changes there to balance it. Express Shot has also had a bug fix, with shotguns instantly applying build-ups off the back of using the item. That's probably been making it get some far better usage than it's meant to, and quite a couple of tweaks to siphon bullets as well, with a cooldown being increased slightly alongside various bug fixes in terms of stat stealing with capacitor and debuff remover, so a couple of tweaks here to balance out the item and make it a bit more reasonable. I love this change though. Headhunter, Headshot Booster, and Restorative Shot will now only proc when the center pellet hits. This means on shotgun heroes you won't be able to get crazy output from it if you're just spamming wildly. You'll have to hit your center pellet. If you don't have a center pellet, it will be the bottom. That's the one that I've realized. It seems to be the bottom bullet on Calico and most other shotgun heroes, just so you know. But this next item change is crazy as well, with both melee charge and crushing fists previously giving you 25% more damage output against objectives. That one's nuts, and I can only imagine the amount of melee Abrams that must have just been punching walkers to death early into the game. This has thankfully been fixed and shouldn't be happening in your games anymore. It'll balance out those items a little bit, so glad to see that one's gone in. But that's it for your patch notice. Of course, if you want to hear more about our thoughts with me and Blank on the Dead Air podcast, that's going to be coming out every Saturday like clockwork. Never missed an episode, have we? Of course, you can also check out what Daisy's been thinking about the Deadlock scene in our next episode of DLN that will be coming out soon. But as always, I've been your host of Patch Notice, Jacky, and you've been watching Dead Air. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your favourite update inside of tonight's patch. Otherwise, check out our other videos, as there's plenty to see on the channel and a lot more coming soon. Otherwise, get back out there and I'll see you in lane.